Hello everyone, and welcome to what I would think is the first of many videos in relation to state asset ownership. Now, as you can see, the first slide of today is slightly different. It is in the context of flag culture, and I would like to go through this first before we go into state asset ownership, because I think it's very important to showcase what we mean when we look at this particular type of mainstream media content that is currently available, and this type of, if you will, patriotism that we are asked to show support for in certain parts of society. Now, the intention with which you support the concept of the flag culture and its symbolism are key in understanding what you actually support. It's not about patriotism, it's about context. We often hear, if you love them so much, how many have you taken in your house? Which may seem as a fair question until you ask, if you support the housing of veterans, how many have you housed? And then the masks slip off and the real in-depth conversations start to unfold. Namely, that in both circumstances, it's not about what we do on an individual level, as you can see they're highlighted in the case of you in both questions, but what our shared values are and how we can work together to build a better world, as much for the future generations as for ourselves. You see, I too sometimes think about flags, and today I would like to look at this idea from a different perspective. Hopefully, I will be able to make more time and look at other parts of the economy from the national security side of this perspective. I would like to start by clarifying what I mean when I say national security, and we are already on this part of the presentation. Now, security scholars generally agree that the most important asset of a nation is its human asset. In that context, society accepts that it is the government's responsibility, the state's responsibility, as you can see there, the British flag, to have, to fund, and to organize its military force with the sole purpose of protecting the human asset from external threats. Now, when I think about flags, I always wonder, how is it that we have convinced ourselves that it is the state's responsibility to protect us from external adversaries, but somehow that responsibility stops there? A brief detour from the main topic that I believe would have a significant impact on you, I hope, but definitely certainly it does on me. My heritage is one where my birth country's population shrank by more than 28% since 1989. What use would the military have if the people they're supposed to protect are barely surviving, or worse, if you are left with no people to protect whatsoever? And on that note, I would turn to the differences between the ownership of national security assets by private businesses as opposed to states, and I will argue why the latter option is preferable. I believe that there are sectors in the economy that must be state-owned if the people living in that country are to be truly sovereign. Additionally, auxiliary support parts of the economy, housing is one such example, upon which the protection of the human asset rests, must be heavily regulated, with public good being at the heart of that instead of private profits. Now, today I would like to show you what the UK energy and rail sectors look like. Using the latest available data from 2024, all data was compiled with the help of AI, that means DeepSeek and ChatGPT, and so, without further ado, the UK, you see, exists within the context of the global capitalist economy. But that does not mean that the UK must maintain that capitalist economic alignment domestically. In fact, the UK is a great example of what life can be like if the economy was run for the public benefit. You need to only look at the short history line flux of the post-war period. I would not want to go down history lane right now. Instead, I would like to focus on the energy and the rail sectors as I mentioned, and I'll give you additionally a slight example of what the energy sector money side looks like. Now, in relation to what you have already been looking at on the screen for some time, is not an exhaustive list, but it is representative of what we currently find ourselves in. So, what I would like to continue is by giving you a little bit of information of what you're currently looking at, just to give you some sense of where we are at. So first and foremost, on the left hand side you see capitalist economy, and on the right hand side you see socialist economy. So what does that mean in terms of energy and rail? Well, it means we are currently at, and what I personally would argue for, and what I would personally campaign for, which is what you can see on the right hand side, which very much ties into the flag culture that I started this with, and it is certainly very important to highlight in what you are currently looking at. So what we have is some companies that are within the energy and rail sectors of the economy where the flags represent either foreign states or a foreign privately owned company. Additionally, especially in the case of rail, you see some companies like Northern, for example, where it says nationalized. So what does that mean? It means that the company started as a private business, failed, and then got saved by the state. And when I say got saved by the state, what I actually mean is that our taxpayers' money paid for that. Now, what are we looking at there? Well, if you look at Scottish Power, for example, where does that money go to? Well, it's a Spanish flag, so that would mean either state itself or Spanish business. E.ON, Germany, EDF, I definitely know that one for sure. It is owned by the French government. So for every customer that we have in the UK currently paying for their gas or electric or both, that money, folks, the profit from it doesn't stay in the UK. It doesn't stay here to help us rebuild or invest in education or in healthcare or in roads or in environmental security or in energy security for that matter. It goes abroad. In terms of rail, well, as you can see there, we have a couple of American flags as well, as the vast majority of companies are privately owned. So before I continue on to the right hand side of your screens, where the energy and rail British flag side of the argument that I argue for are, I would just like to clarify what the word profit means. So for me, the easiest way to explain this is salaries. You get your salary, which is a gross salary. You pay your taxes on it, you pay your national insurance on it, you pay your pensions contributions on it. And whatever is left over would be your net income, which basically you have to spend on all your outgoings. Now, in our case, our outgoings additionally trim down our income, and then our leftover is quite very much small representation of the main salary indeed. Now, from the profit perspective, what you look at is all, after all outgoings of a business, what they make and what remains as a net profit. Then obviously that's something that that business can spend on, or the owners of that business can spend on various other things, whether that would be a fifth mansion or a yacht or a private jet, or they would buy a small island, or they would create a think tank that would lobby for their side of the class that they represent. But nonetheless, that is basically the comparison and my understanding of how profit and how salaries work, just for you to have an idea. Now, what does a socialist economy, a people-first public good economy, look like in the context of energy and rail? Well, as it's represented by the flag, the whole point from a national security perspective is for the state to own, i.e. the public to own solely their energy security, their transport security, infrastructure, as well as provision of said services. Now, of course, these are not the only two aspects of the economy that must be state-owned in my view. There are others as well, military being one of them, of course, which I already alluded to earlier. But it certainly is the case that housing, for example, must be regulated a lot more than it currently is. It must be regulated in a way that allows for the public to actually be able to afford to live. And what we currently have is a system that doesn't allow us to do that. In fact, it profits from our misery. Okay? If you have to pay 850 quid for a 2 or 3 bed house, whilst one parent is on a full-time work and the other parent is, I suppose, looking after the children, or if they're working and trying to juggle that, childcare is absolutely obscene in the UK. And don't get me started on social care, the healthcare system, or the education system, which focuses on numbers rather than on people. If we look at other countries that have far superior educational systems than ours, their children and educators are a lot happier, which obviously contributes to a lot happier and a lot more functional as well as productive societies indeed. But we can get to that point later down the line in other videos. For the purposes of this one, I would like now to turn to the money side of the energy sector, specifically profits. What you currently see here, folks, is an Excel spreadsheet which I took the liberty of creating for the purposes of this video, but also to be able to argue, not for the purposes of arguing, but to be able to debate with people when we discuss what would be good for us and what isn't good for us. Now, as I said, all of these that are represented here, you can also see them, or you can always refer to them later down the line. You can make a note and you can see which companies, I'll use EDF as an example, have profited just over £5.2 billion from us, from the British taxpayer, that the British taxpayer will never see the light of this money, as well as, of course, the UK government support for the same period of time in terms of financial support, which is 27 billion that you see there for EDF Energy. Now, of course, we have the period of 2014 to 2023, and the blue representation here is for each year, okay, for each company, how much money they made. And obviously, the company profits are in millions of pounds by year. In the context of the total amount, well, as you can see, there is just over 35.8 billion pounds money that I would argue could pay for our social care, adult social care. I believe the bill that we currently have as the whole of the UK is just over 30 billion. So obviously those numbers might not be accurate, because I don't think that there is enough information available from accurate sources, from the people that actually do the work. But even if it's more than that, I believe that 35 billion pounds is quite a lot of money that we could have invested or looked at using differently for the benefit of the whole of society. Okay, but also in addition to that 35.8 billion, you have 52.9 that we additionally paid for from the side of direct financial government support for that same period, which brings that number to just over 88.7 billion pounds for a 9-year period. That's roughly approximately 9 billion per year. Whilst at the same time we are being told that, oh, we can't afford 3 billion pounds for other parts of society, such as, let's say, PIP, or we have to cut an additional 5 billion there. And so you see, it's a false argument. There are ways how a society can be run for the benefit of the public, but the public themselves have to first see that benefit in the society that could be created for them. And of course, vote for that kind of society and for that kind of economic system. We had that in the you had that in the UK. I didn't have it. I wasn't here at the time, but you had airports like Heathrow, I believe, which were state-owned. You had so many businesses like British Gas who were state-owned, Royal Mail, which was state-owned. You had the post-war period where you created the crown jewel of the welfare state, the one establishment institution, the NHS, that has looked after the nation's healthcare for so many years. You have built 32 towns and cities from scratch, and that was entirely done by investing in your country and in your human asset, which is what this video has been about so far. I hope that this will be helpful in clarifying what capitalist domestic economy looks like and what a socialist domestic economy looks like from the point of view of national security, as well as the human asset, as well as the public good and sovereignty, national sovereignty, that we hold so dearly. So in that context, I thank you very much for your time, having said that, and I hope that you would be joining us in the future should I post anything similarly as well.